Hi, year 12s. How you going? I um, I wanted to today just go through just getting ready for your sack next week. So I was laughing because I asked you how you were and you can't respond to me because I'm creating this video. Anyway, yeah, so today I just wanted to go through a little bit of a checklist to take into consideration for when you are doing your draft for your creative piece. And like most of you guys have already started on your creative piece. This is just to kind of help you improve your writing while you are drafting. If you've listened to this video, maybe you can take one or two things into consideration. Mainly, guys, if we get up the learning task, not the screen recorder, hold on, let me get up Compass. If I go to your learning tasks that says creative response to text, let me just show you the instructions for the SAC. I know you guys have seen this already, but it says produce a creative response drawing on ideas and language of Kate Kennedy's short story collection, Like a House on Fire. It is 800 to 1,000 words and it's 250 words for the written explanation. And in my previous video, I have already gone through what goes in a written explanation. So basically, your main things is that you are drawing on the ideas and the language of Kate Kennedy. Ideas we have gone through, we are looking at things like conflict. What are the causes and consequences of conflict here? Insight. How do characters gain that insight that we see at the end? Communication or lack of communication. What makes characters change? What makes characters so resilient? Where are characters seeking connection? That happens a lot at the end of Kate Kennedy's stories. Also forgiveness, tenderness, and vulnerability. Those are our key ideas. So you need to be talking about one or multiple of those ideas. And the other thing it said was the language. The language features of Kate Kennedy. And I'll go through that now, and I've also gone through that in the video on the written explanation. So that's what you need to do. You can select a character whose perspective you are writing from. You can select a scene that was mentioned but was not gone into, and you can show it. So like in 72 Derwents, Ellie has memories of her mum's past boyfriends, but we never see that. You could do something like that. You could do a memory of Chris and his ex-partner. You can do when Anthony met Marie in Static. That's not shown, but it's kind of alluded to. You could do Laminex and Mirrors when she gets to London. You know, you can also do a scene that is kind of mentioned, but is not gone through. So those are your options here. I have put up this handout called a creative writing checklist and written explanation. So these are some things to take into consideration. So if you look at your Like a House on Fire student notes, there is a whole section on the author's message. That's really clear to keep in your mind because that's pretty much what you need to be conveying in your story as well. It says here, Kennedy has said in an interview that her goal was to make readers practice empathy. When I add those dimensions to a character, another layer opens up. So you also, when you are writing your story, you want to enable an audience to feel some sort of tenderness or some sort of empathy for a character. The next thing is for stories that can encapsulate a life within a dozen pages, for a tender and unsparing gaze on the ordinary events. So a lot of these events and what you're going to write about as well, they're going to be like really ordinary day to day, but it's to kind of really shine a spotlight, even if it's a scene in the kitchen, to really explain what's going on and how to make a scene that is just really ordinary. It could be just making a cup of tea in the kitchen, but how to make that really tender and how to make that really kind of meaningful. That was Kate Kennedy's kind of purpose. And that's something I want you guys to try and imbibe in your stories as well. So I've just put a little summary of the written explanation. Now, I think I've already gone through that in another video, but I think it's just really important to be clear on these things, because then your story is better and your story is clear. What ideas or message are you trying to convey? What new or additional insight are you going to add? Remember, the whole reason why you are writing this story is you're not just recycling and re-summarizing what's going on. You are writing this story and you have selected this story because you feel like I've got something to convey here. I've got something new to say about this story. People haven't considered this, and I'm trying to add this to an audience's perspective, and that's why you've included that. So you need to make sure that whatever you've got to say has some insight. It can't just be kind of meaningless, yeah? And this will need to be in line with the key themes and messages of Kate Kennedy. That's important. What short stories will you be drawing from, and what literary and devices and language features? Now, I said in the written explanation video that basically your purpose is what you're trying to do, and the audience section or the language features is how you're going to achieve that. If you want to make your audience feel some sort of empathy for Claire as well, you're going to try and express that via the language features you use, yeah? So you need to be clear on how you are trying to make your audience feel and what you will use to achieve that, okay? Now, one way you can achieve your purpose in a short story is its structure, which is the next thing I'm going to go through. Now, this is based on what I've seen so far. A lot of you have written stories which are just kind of like a blob of thoughts that your character is thinking. There is no kind of beginning, middle, and end. It is just kind of a flow of consciousness from your character. And that's okay. But to be honest, Year 12s, it's a little bit boring because it kind of doesn't have a direction. It kind of doesn't have any tension, any climax, any kind of anticipation. Yeah. So one way to kind of help this is to structure your piece. You guys would have learned this in Year 9 and 10, but basically in a story, you need to have a beginning. You need to have some sort of complication or problem. And that can be made clear right at the beginning as well. It needs to kind of build to a climax and then it gets resolved. And it could be resolved happily, it could be resolved in a bad way, but that is the essential structure. You have a beginning, it builds, climaxes, and then there's a resolution, okay? My hand's like looking funny. Anyway, so in the beginning, because this is a short story and you don't have time, you're not writing a novel here, what I've said is dive straight into the setting of a story. Use it as a springboard for your character's thoughts and feelings. You will notice a lot of stories are Kate Kennedy dives right into a scene. So the first scene of Flexion is the scene where Frank is injured. The first scene in Static is on Christmas Day and when Marie's setting up all the food. The first scene in Waiting is her sitting in the waiting room. The first scene in $5 Family is Michelle just having delivered a baby. So something is happening and you are sucked into the action, and try and start your piece that way because it'll be really exciting. The reader will be like, oh, what's going on here? Just instead of just thoughts, which can get a little bit boring. Be clear on what your problem is. There needs to be something going on. Like in Ashes, Chris is coming to terms with his dad's death, but also with the fact that he didn't even like his dad. So how do you say goodbye to someone who gave you so much sadness? You know, that's a problem. in Laminex and Mirrors. You know, the narrator is trying to come to terms with all this death that she's seeing around her when she's so young and full of hopes and dreams. So that's kind of internal conflict. So you need to be clear on what the complication of your story is. And you can show this problem, you can build it up through flashbacks, dialogues, description of the setting, etc. This is where you build up the tension. Yeah, there needs to be some sort of tension happening in your story. Then climax. So how will you make your story really interesting and exciting? A lot of these stories in like A House on Fire have like really tense moments, inflection when the narrator says, take a good look to Frank, and Frank realizes he's actually really helpless. In Static, where Anthony collapses on the ground. In 72 Derwents, when Shane asks Tyler to pee in the cup, you know that Shane's really creepy, but you know never expected this to escalate, yeah? And then, you know, you knew that Claire was kind of pissed off at her husband, but, you know, there's a moment of anger where she actually calls him a control freak and tells him to get stuffed, really. So that's like moments of tension. I want you to start to try and create that as well. And the last thing is, how will you resolve it? Now, this is really important because a lot of Kate Kennedy's stories end in the following: a moment of realization. A character realizes, like in Ashes, Chris realizes, well, I didn't come to the party even though my parents were trying to make an effort as well. So that it's not just them that's wrong. I was pretty biased as well. Or in Static, where Anthony realizes, I'm not going to have a baby with Marie. I don't want to be with her anymore. A moment of reflection. That's like in Waiting, where she's in the waiting room. She knows she's about to lose a baby, but she thinks of Pete and she's like, I love Pete. I'm just going to do what's done. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to give up, you know, because that's how much I love my husband. A moment of insight in $5 Family. One of my favorite moments is when she starts breastfeeding and she's like, I don't need my partner anymore. I just, you know, I have everything that this baby could want. And a moment of connection. So we see that in like A House on Fire, where Claire and the husband kind of connect. An inflection. There's a moment of connection as well. And in Laminex and Mirrors with Mr. Morton and the narrator. So your ending you need to be considering something like that. What is that moment of insight or connection or reflection your characters have? Yeah, so that is something to help structure your piece so that it has a little more depth than just being thoughts from your character. Language features I want you to consider. Motifs. Having an object in the story that represents, you know, the relationship. Personification. So that means, sorry, I'm just aware that I'm going to run out of time. So that means describing the objects around in the story that makes them seem alive. So the lounge chair exhales a gust of weary depression. So chairs don't breathe, but she's describing it as if, you know, when you sit on it, how it kind of collapses. So she's described that as the couch exhaling. And so that just makes the descriptions of the surroundings really interesting. Internal voice. Now, you guys are kind of doing that well. It's your character's thoughts. References to memories. Year 12s, this is kind of important because this is one thing you need to kind of remember about anyone's mind. No one person completely stays in the present the whole time, unless you're like a monk and you have realized the truth about life, really. Everyone is constantly flicking back and forth between regrets of the past and anxieties of the future, and then you're in the present moment, and then you're looking at what's happening around you and you're reacting to that, and then that triggers a memory in the past and that triggers something else. Like, a to-do list in your head. So your mind actually always flickers back and forth. And so when you cut back to memories, or you flash forward to the future, or your character is speculating about the future, you are actually accurately capturing how the mind works. I'm going to run out of time, so I will do the rest after in the next video. Okay, cool.